about focusing on the expense management aspect. I think understanding that brands, I've talked about brand essence, and really, once you define that, figure that out, stay true to it, and live by it, and get everybody in your company to live by it. And then just, never quit learning, and hire only the best people. And finally, I'll leave you with this. Peter Drucker, most of you hopefully know who Peter Drucker is, one of the gurus, but there's so much to think about, but it really boils down to one thing. The whole purpose of all of this is to get and keep customers. So there's a lot, obviously, that I talked about here, and I know you're going through and thinking about, but I think if you keep that at the forefront and create your business around it, you're good. So thank you. I went over. Sylvia.
Kelley, did you all have competitors from the get-go, or was this a unique thing and then people started jumping in?
We did. In one of our competitors, Sylvia, was the actual customer prospect themselves, because they were saying, well, we built our own system or systems. And so, we can customize it any way we want to. So we actually, in some ways, competed against what they had done. There were some software companies out there, like this Group 1 I mentioned, that had been around from the early 80s, but there were so few of them, they kind of got a little lax in keeping their products current. And so that was, Dan and Davis knew that because they had worked with those products at these PDR companies. And so that was, they knew they could take advantage of that. But they were focused, Sylvia, on, there were a couple of software companies that only focused on the insurance industry. They only did insurance documents. There was one that just focused on the banking industry. So they were pretty specific, and we were across all of those.
Great presentation.
Thank you, Sylvia. Thanks.
Kelley, I think one of the interesting things about that whole story is, and it is good for people to remember, is that even though they started Exstream and started writing that software in '98, they were building on deep knowledge of that printing side of that operation. So even though they were being very disruptive and taking advantage of all this new electronic communications and all of that, and building that, they were able to go into those customers that already knew that they were the experts and already had that core. Probably the core of all that still, I would guess, when y'all first started, was still, it's got to print.
Exactly.
And they knew that side inside and out, and had, 12, 15 years under their belt of building up that knowledge and understanding. So, I used to always say, I'm going to be a 15-year overnight success story. That's, there are 20 to 25 years worth of industry knowledge that went into culminating in this. And I think it's,
That's exactly right. Yeah. Yes.
Kelley, having the right talent is important. You want to tell some stories here or over beers about hiring people and the decision of hiring versus promoting from within?
Sure.
Especially when you're growing.
Yeah, that's a great point, and I certainly will share more stories with you. I'll start with let me start with Dan Davis. I mean, from the beginning, it was very, very high bar of who they wanted to be a part of the team. And certainly on the development side, I mean, they had Chris from the early PDR days, but we were able to find people like that were right out of school, a couple of them, that were top in their class. But yeah, never settled for anyone who wasn't very experienced, very knowledgeable, and had the same core values. I think that's also important. And there weren't too many people let go over the course of the years. There really wasn't much turnover at all. More maybe in the last couple of years, a little bit to competitors, but not very much. But there were a few people that were let go, and it was just simply because they didn't want to keep up with the pace. They didn't, you know, when you're in an environment like that, you are moving and changing constantly. And if you don't like that, if you're somebody who just wants to do, you know, an 8-5, 9-5 and go do your thing and leave, then you're probably not going to fit in that environment. So those were also characteristics that we, you know, always look for. But yeah, that's a great point. And of course, you can't build anything without having the best of the best. And in marketing, I talked about Kim McBride and her team, but you know, to me, they were just absolutely essential to the success that we had in marketing. They built the whole brand. I had PR firms I worked with that I feel the same way about, were just an extended part of the team. And so, yeah, I don't know if I answered your question, and we can talk more about it later, but we went through, we didn't even have really an HR department until late in the, I don't know, last few years probably. So it was just, but whoever did come in interviewed with everybody. I mean, you went through a grueling process.
How many people did y'all move to Lexington? You know, out of those 314.
Did you hear that, Chris? How many people moved to Lexington, would you say?
I'm going to say maybe 40 or 50.
Yeah.
Because a lot of the we had 40 or 50 salespeople who were remote,
Right.
but then probably we hired a lot of local people.
Yeah, we did. I think there were about 100, close to 100 people in Lexington. In fact, when HP acquired us, I think it was about 100 that we moved into the building out at Cold Street. And I'd say, yeah, at least 50% of those were from here, or around here, and the rest moved. And it's interesting you bring that up, because we started, and Kim will remember this, we grappled with this, and I did with the PR firm as well. And we're trying to build this image of this big, you know, huge, successful company, and we're this little startup from Lexington, Kentucky. And I think all of us here know that, you know, a lot of people don't have an image of Kentucky as, you know, being the Silicon Valley of places to be. And we're selling, you know, anywhere from, you know, $500,000 software to, you know, on the lower end, it was probably 100,000 up to $1 million in the early days, and then they got bigger and bigger as we went. But when you're trying to go in and propose that kind of software, so you want to come across with that kind of image. And we grappled with, do we say Kentucky? Can we just say Lexington? Can we just put our web address? And you know, it worked out that it didn't matter. It didn't matter. What mattered were, right, what our customers were doing. And a quick story, Fidelity Investments. So I mentioned that when I started in April of 2000, we had just landed them. And that was our first customer in the U.S. And of course, I had talked to that guy in that training class who told me just, you know, get people in front of this. So I knew that that was key. Gosh, Fidelity Investments, you know, first big name, got to leverage that. Got to the main guy and convinced him to do a press release that they had bought the software. And of course, to me, you know, what's key in that press release is the quote from the customer. That's probably the most important thing. So went through this long, you know, back and forth period, and went through their legal people and all that. Right at the very end, the QMX said, you can do it, but basically you can have this one paragraph. We're not putting a quote in there. We just, you know, we're not comfortable with that. So I thought, you know, well, we'll go ahead and we'll get this out anyway. But it turns out that that's how we got in the door with Merrill Lynch, which was our next big customer in the financial services area. Merrill Lynch, somebody at Merrill Lynch had seen that press release, and they thought, you know, who the heck is this company at Fidelity Investments? So from there, it just, you know, kept rolling. And we just kept on and on, and Merrill Lynch became one of our huge, we had case studies on them. We had them speaking for us out at, you know, big trade show conferences. That's another thing that we were able to do. And again, based on the whole foundation of focusing on customer successes, not just getting customers, making them successful. And once we had that, they were willing, they loved us because we made their lives so much easier. They would go out and speak in front of hundreds or, people at these trade shows and just say, this is the coolest software ever. They would do press releases with us. They would, work with us on case studies. So that was just, and then once you have that, not only do other prospects notice that, but analysts, the industry analysts, the Forresters and the Gartner groups, they're hugely influential in these big IT sales. And when they see those, that means everything to them. So that's what's credible. Marketing brochure is not credible. Your website's critical, and it's critical to have the content and the messages right, but that's not credible either. It's what those influential people say, and nobody's more influential than customers. Kim?
As I recall, it was the customers who provided a lot of the metrics that we used in a lot of the literature. I mean, they had incredible success stories and numbers that we were able to use.
Absolutely.
30% savings in this, 55% increase in that.
Yeah, exactly. And my guess is you probably, all the companies that you all worked with, you probably didn't have that a whole lot. Because it's hard for a lot of companies to get those numbers from customers or to get them to let you use them. And if you have a great relationship with that customer, they want to help you out, just like any other relationship. And we were able to. Hey,
If you were starting right now to market Exstream all over again, what kinds of things would you change, considering how much marketing has changed? Like the world I work in search and things like that.
well, yeah. I mean, in today's world, the web and social media is everything. So clearly, that would have been a key channel for us to focus on and figure out how to leverage. But I think, Scott, the basic stuff, what I was just talking about with these customers and just focusing on that and leveraging, that wouldn't change. I wouldn't go back and do any of that because, again, it just makes it so much easier. Once you get that rolling, it's just like a domino effect. And so I think we would use use social media to get those stories out faster, maybe, and maybe to more people faster. Probably could save money. Could probably save some money with the technologies today. I mean, one of the things we hated spending money on, but we felt like we had to do, and we're successful, of course, were these big trade shows. And those cost that costs a lot of money. And you got to be very focused on measuring the success of those, or we did anyway, to make those make sense going forward. Those aren't as big today. I mean, the great big ones I'm talking about. And so if they're great big, you've got to buy a big space or a relatively big space if you're even going to show up at all. So that, in fact, when we got to HP, we were doing fewer and fewer of those kind of things, more small type events. But that's a great question. And other than that, I don't know. I think, we pretty much focused on the basics. Kim, do you have something to add?
Yeah, what was the marketing budget that you ended up with? You know, it started with, what did you? Because it covered trade shows and.
Yeah, and what we did is we divided it. I divided out the people. At the end, I had 12 or 13 people in my group. 4 of those were in Europe, and the rest were here. So take those aside, and just what we spent on programs, marketing programs is what we refer to it. It was around $1 million.